what I saw today. I saw outside the liquor store, there was a guy laying on the pavement, laying down like he's taking a nap in the middle of the day in front of the liquor store, going like this.
This sexy guy Stud's just about done making this YouTube video.
And you know what I said to myself? I said, hey, the great injustice of our time is that this guy...
My primary focus on my channel is pizzas and burgers.
...isn't getting his allotment of time at the Super Collider, okay? This guy that's drunk at 10 a.m. and is probably a rapist.
That's no different than calling a gay person a fag.
Have confidence.
If I couldn't take a damn joke, then why would I make fun of my Asperger's every time I fart?
No confidence.
Oh man, it's episode 141 of Radio Free Innsmouth. So, a couple weeks ago I did an episode on Gates of Slumber, wherein I stated, the biggest doom metal band from the Midwest right now is probably Paul Bearer, who did one album I really liked, the first one, and then after that I don't know what those guys have been up to. I'm not into later Paul Bearer at all. So I got to Thinnin', and then I went back and re-listened to some of my other Paul Bearer albums, their second and third one specifically, and turns out I might have been misjudging them. I actually do rather enjoy them. Interesting development with that band. This episode isn't going to be about Paul Bearer. I just kind of wanted to bring that up. Like later Paul Bearer, pretty cool. And they have a new album coming out very soon.
The clock on my embalming room wall is ticking down. Only 3 weeks away to WrestleMania.
Which could be interesting, but I'm having trouble getting excited for it because I really don't like the cover of it. It looks like an ethnic studies textbook or something.
Do you love black people?
Sure, I love black people.
Wow.
I mean, it's not like it's technically incompetent or anything. It's a good painting. It's just not terribly in line with my aesthetic tastes. I think that's sort of a curse with Paul Bearer, is their even-numbered albums, 4 albums into their career, seem to be the ones that have the uglier covers. Because look at the first album, it's like this blown-up wooden boat, bunch of spaceship things, some kind of Grim Reaper dude, and it looks cool. Like the purple and the gold and whatnot. And then their third album has got this mountain rock dude guy. It's spooky looking. But then their second album, it looks like it'd be cool because it's got this spooky Grim Reaper looking guy holding a lamp post, and then there's a bunch of cities, fantasy cities growing out of a gory looking human heart and shit. But then you get down to the lower left hand corner and big old naked dude butt. It wasn't cool when Rush did it, and it's not really cool on that cover either, so I don't know.
이번에 처음으로
Right, back on topic. This week we're covering 2 bands on Dark Descent Records, which is one of my favorite record labels. One of the most notable things about their roster is it has a very no-frills feel to it. It tends to be just kind of more masculine sounding, old school kind of bands. I mean, their biggest band right now is probably Blood Incantation, and I guess they are a little bit
stories, science fiction stories.
But even with treading in possibly nerdy waters, they're still very rooted in old school death metal. The 2 bands that typify the platonic form of what a Dark Descent band is are 2 bands that have been around a very long time. We have Cyanide from Chicago, and we have Divine Eve from Texas. And they have similar sounds. There are important differences. They're part of kind of this larger sort of doom death thing. What is doom death? Well, you would say it's a mixture of doom metal and death metal. I read a pretty interesting review of the first Hooded Menace album years ago, and one part of it always stuck with me. This is off Metal Archives, written in 2009 by Cheese's Priced, about the first Hooded Menace album that came out on Razorback Records about 3 years prior. He asks, is there really such a thing as old school death doom, or are we retroactively inventing something to be nostalgic about here? We're not talking about My Dying Bride because that would be too sentimental for anything on Razorback Records, and we're not talking about Funeral Doom because that's too serious and pretentious, not to mention quote, not being real doom, unquote, and you can count on Razorback bands being unpretentious as well as being the most real and metal version of whatever style they're supposed to be in. There's Disembowelment and Winter, but they're both serious outliers, and then we have Asphyx, who are mostly just a slothful death metal band. Still good though. Cathedral are the real precedent. Heavy influence from Sabbath, heavy influence from bands heavily influenced by Sabbath, heavy Cookie Monster vocals, and heavy guitar tuning. So there you go. Death Doom, maybe not really a thing that exists, certainly a more modern label. However, if you were to make a counterpoint and say, no, Death Doom's a real thing, Cyanide and Divine Eve would be two major places you would go. Cyanide are from 1988. They're from Chicago, much like Master. And like Master, being a very old school Chicago death metal band, they also have a hefty amount of kind of like hardcore punk influence and just kind of a more punk way of doing things, a bit more minimalist. Here's the first riff off the first song on their second album. It's called Gates of Slumber, which of course is what the band Gates of Slumber is named after. And it's heavy on the chromaticism and whatnot. And it might remind you quite a bit of a particular band from the 80s.
That's a good one.
That's right, hefty amount of Celtic Frost influence in Cyanide. What that means is you're going to get riffs that are all very much concentrated at the top of the guitar neck, way up by the tuning pegs. They're not going to be constructed in a way that's very melodic or based around scales. It's more primitive, a lot of like those first three frets and just putting them in unorthodox combinations. Still catchy, but very barbaric and minimalist. And good stuff. But to that sort of Celtic Frost style riffing, they add quite a bit of Sabbath style doom metal. This riff right here is pretty interesting because it's almost stoner-ish, but it's dissonant and mean enough to not fall into that category. Very groove-heavy riff. Interesting stuff, and it reminds me specifically of...
What we're gonna do right here is go back. Way back into time.
The kind of riffs you might hear on Master of Reality. Cyanide takes this kind of style of, once again, way high up on the guitar there, or I guess down low in terms of pitch, and just going through these unorthodox combinations of notes with a heavy emphasis on groove, but also maintaining a sinister aura to the music. So you take that sort of like punkish Celtic Frost thing and that sinister Sabbath thing, you mix it up with a decent amount of hardcore punk and whatnot, and early death metal, and you get what Cyanide sounds like. This is maybe my favorite Cyanide song, which is why I'm concentrating so much on it. The first half of the song is these two parts, those two facets of their sound alternating back and forth. So lots of good groove riffs running seamlessly into almost kind of proto-black metal Celtic Frost shit. But then it transitions via this slow-paced double bass roll into something that we would definitely recognize as being a modern form of death doom, if such a thing is existent. Really good textural variations. They've been playing the same riff for a bit, but they keep changing up exactly how they play it in terms of right-hand guitar technique, which keeps things interesting. And then, great utilization in negative space, silent bits between notes to build atmosphere, letting that nasty guitar tone ring out. This is actually one of my favorite guitar tones of all time on this album, which used to be very expensive but has since been reissued by Dark Descent. Thank you very much for doing that. This came out, what, like 1992, 93, something like that. So this is old. And so despite being made of primitive ingredients, the variety of transitions and sections in each song keeps the sound interesting. Like when they get fast right here. There we go. This could be like Master almost. Maybe even like a really very brutal version of a Discharge riff. And they do get faster quite often. This is off their third album. This one's called Rage War. And it shows that punkier side of the band. It's still very primitive. And I would say it's still essentially doom metal. It's very gloomy and minimalist, nasty stuff, despite being slightly more up-tempo. I like the switch from like that kind of polka beat he was doing to this more rolling double bass thing. So Cyanide, great band, more well-known than they used to be. Nobody knew about these guys from what I could tell, but they have their place in death metal history. The other band we're covering this week I've actually had the pleasure of seeing live, and that is Divine Eve. This song is called The Last of the Sunset Faded. It's the first track off of their 1993 EP, As the Angels Weep. And once again, obvious Celtic Frost influence. In fact, I would say this particular section of the song, when they do stuff like this, it sounds quite a bit like Cyanide, hence why I'm covering them together. They're from the same era, they have a similar sound. Sort of. Like this shit sounds like Cyanide, right? It sounds just like that Rage War song, very similar. Just these descending, chromatic, Celtic Frost influence riffs existing in the space between 80s black metal and 80s death metal. But then we hit the doom bits. These guys actually get even slower than Cyanide quite often. And the drum technique is very different. It doesn't have that rolling double bass. Instead we have these like cymbal crashes, emphasis on just hitting beats really hard. And then a much higher level of melodic lead guitar going on with these guys, which gives their sound quite a bit of layering. They aren't primitive in the way that Cyanide is. I don't know which one I like better, but I do know that both of these guys are different, and they both have a contribution to make in terms of spooky, atmospheric music suitable for all of your spooky Halloween needs.
Boom! Haunted house!
But they do get fast again, don't you worry. That's what I mean. These guys, Cyanide and them are pretty similar because they have songs with a lot of different sections. It's just that Divine Eve goes for more of like a layered, atmospheric, almost kind of melodic thing. And Cyanide keeps it very brutal and primitive. The only crappy thing about Divine Eve is, unlike Cyanide, they don't have a whole bunch of albums. They had this one EP, then they broke up, and then they did another EP in the early 2010s. But, spoiler alert, there is a hidden Divine Eve album. It's put out by a different band name, but it's almost the same lineup, and it includes songs that were demoed as Divine Eve. This band is called Crimson Relic, and they are great. This song's called Velvet of the Godless. It was originally a 1994 demo Divine Eve song. Now it's a 1996 Crimson Relic song, and it shows their penchant for emerging out of fast chaos with a very nasty mid-paced doom metal riff. I've seen this album described on Dark Descent's own website as the best death metal album you've never heard, and I can't help but agree, because this stuff's pretty darn good, and I never hear anybody talk about it. Cool little melodic lead guitar winding its way around stuff. Well, not even melodic, more just spooky and dissonant. I mean, some of the songs are new, like perhaps my personal favorite Crimson Relic / Divine Eve song, Innocence Lost. This one you can hear, I would say it's kind of black metal. Nice mid-paced riff here. But they are going to collapse all of it into some pretty nasty doom metal stuff in a bit. Like right here. Okay, this part is really cool because it's got these layered guitars. It's super dark. You have this repeating arpeggiated melody over these crashing guitar codes, and they double up on it with some harmony. Very lush. Definitely not like Cyanide's minimalism at all. This is its own thing. And then this right here, this part right here, it's almost kind of happy in a way. And I really enjoy it. You don't hear this kind of weird, very heavy, brutal death doom with like a lighter edge to it. This part, kind of cathedraly, but they're doing their own thing. And I love it. Like, I was listening to this the other day, and that was, you know, I already had Gates of Slumber in my head because I've been listening to them so much, so I'm like, okay, Cyanide. But then I was listening to this Crimson Relic thing, and I was like, holy fuck, this is like one of the best death metal songs ever. So I'm like, let's just do Divine Eve and friggin' Cyanide, because they have similar roots to their sound and they take it in very different directions. So Crimson Relic, that was Crimson Relic. Then they broke up. Then the same guys came back as like Divine Eve, so I just kind of call all of it Divine Eve. Technically, Crimson Relic had a dude from Morgion in it, but it all sounds like Divine Eve. I just call it Divine Eve, whatever. Go check both of these out. They're great, and they're very easy to get now thanks to Dark Descent, who always do a good job. Hashtag not a sponsor, just free advertisement. King Cobra JFS.
If you don't get some of this tactical soap for yourself, you're being an absolute tool, my dude.
And with that, I'll see you next week. Check out my other videos. Check out the podcasts I'm on in the video description if you're not already listening to this on one of those shows. Bye.
This guy on his tricycle, I really want to kill him. I want to run into him and smash him and just have his brains all over the pavement and just kill this guy and smash him while he's on his little tricycle. Basically, if that ever happened and the police found this recording, basically I'd go to jail forever.
Hey, newsflash, dickweed.